How's it going? The latest Marvel Snap client update has just dropped. In addition to bringing with it a copy of Jane Foster for everyone that did not already own that card, it also refunded every bit of gold that every player had spent on the Nexus events that have subsequently removed from the game. In addition to those two things, this client patch also brings with it a number of balance changes to 8 different cards. We have buffs, we have nerfs, we have side grades. Let's take a look at the changes that were made. Let me give you my thoughts on some of them. For this first set of changes, I feel like we need to look at these changes as a group before I give my specific thoughts. So let's look at a few cards here to begin. We have Colleen Wing, a discard enabler, now a 2-mana 4-power card, still discards the lowest cost card in your hand. This was previously a 3-mana 5-power card. We have Swordmaster being reduced from a 4-mana 7-power card to a 3-mana 6-power card, still discarding a single card at random from your hand. And finally, Hellcow was upgraded from 2 mana to a whopping 4 mana, but still remaining at 6 power, discarding 2 cards at random from your hand when it flips up. I think the immediate thing that jumps out at me about all these changes is 2 things. The first is that I like that the developers acknowledge that, hey, the discard archetype kind of needs cards to play on curve in key spots. So if we're going to change the mana cost on Hellcow, we need to adjust other things in this package, in this case, Swordmaster and Colleen Wing, to kind of make things smooth for people that have these cards to play with. The one thing that does come as a little bit of a surprise to me is the fact that while Colleen Wing and Swordmaster got their power downgraded when they got their mana downgraded, Hellcow remained at just 6 power while its mana cost was doubled. This might be the right spot to leave it, but I feel like I would have liked another power or 2 in here. I'll be interested to see if the discard deck is still one of the better decks in the format. I definitely think the Swarm Apocalypse Dracula deck was probably the one of, if not the best deck before this patch. We'll see if it still remains competitive after the fact with these changes to these discard enablers. Up next, we have, let's not call it a strict buff, but a side grade for the Kingpin card here. Still a 3-mana 4-power card that says, when a card moves here on turn 6, destroy it. So previously, Kingpin said when a card moves here on the following turn, destroy it, which meant that you had more specific timing windows when you had to play Kingpin. Kingpin specifically works really well with cards like, Magneto, as well as Arrow, who moves everything on the turn your opponent plays it, but that requires you to sequence Kingpin on turn 4 when it's a 3-drop for Arrow, or on turn 5 when Magneto's a 6-drop coming up. So Kingpin always happening on the 6th turn kind of gives you some flexibility on where you can fit it in on your curve to still have its effect. I also really like the fact that because the way Kingpin flips up, it gives some agency to your opponent. Your opponent sees Kingpin flip up and they know, okay, if my opponent can manage to move something here on turn 6, it could get destroyed. So it gives your opponent a chance to have some counterplay to Kingpin's effect because they can choose to simply fill the location that Kingpin is at on turns 4 and 5. So on turn 6, nothing can be moved there. It's a really neat kind of play and counterplay. I really like the change on this card specifically. Lizard has been made strictly better. Previously a 2-mana 4-power card. It is now a 2-mana 5-power card that ongoing still only gets -3. This means worst case, you're still getting 2 power out of your 2-drop. I kind of expect this card to be kind of reasonable. Depends on how many swarm decks are in the meta. You know, are decks filling the board with literal swarms? Are there 1-drops? If you are worried about things being filled with 1-drops, are you playing Killmonger so you can clean things out? The payoff of getting 5 power for just 2 resources is definitely a pretty good rate, and I wouldn't be surprised to see this one see play now. Speaking of ones I wouldn't be surprised to see play now, oh, that's the next one. Nikia, ooh, opposite. This one is a little bit of a head scratch to me, if I'm being honest. At one point, I had called Nikia one of the best cards in Snap, but she wasn't really present in the discard collector deck that had kind of been the best deck in the format, and I feel like it's kind of gutting her a little bit too much with this change that they made, so they didn't side grade Nikia here. They didn't give her extra power, they didn't reduce her mana cost, they just made her effect strictly worse. And this copy of Nikia now only provides 5 power for a 3 mana card, and the rate of 5 power for a 3 mana card, especially when you don't control where the 2 additional points of those power are going in your hand, really isn't that good of a rate. I feel like with this change on Nikia, they could have easily reduced her to be a 2 mana card, or they maybe could have had her give 3 things in your hand plus 2, so she still gives 7 power. But I kind of don't expect Nikia to be particularly playable at 5 stats for 3 mana. Now, a card I do expect to be particularly playable is the next one. There she is. Rescue was previously, I think, one of the worst cards in Snap. This was a 5 mana, 5 power card that had this same effect. If you play a card here next turn, plus 5 power, which meant that you basically had to commit your turn 5 and turn 6 plays to the same location to maximize Rescue. But that dynamic's very different with the 4-drop. Not only do you get to play Rescue on 4 now, meaning you can enable her the following turn long before the final turn of the game, but 9 power worth of stats for 4 mana is a lot in Marvel Snap. Like, this is a very reasonable stat line that's far easier to enable, and I expect this to be a card that I will play inside of a variety of the mid-rangey decks that I really like playing in Snap. Finally, Collector. Probably one of the best payoffs you could enable in the game. I've mentioned the discard Collector deck a couple of times. While this is technically a side grade, Collector was previously a 2 mana 0 power card. It's now a 2 mana 1 power card. It only gets 1 power every time a card enters your hand from anywhere other than your deck. I think this change is probably good overall, even if it makes me personally a little bit sad. Collector was definitely a card that I regularly got to 10, 12, 20 power occasionally in games. And if this card is now going to be a 2-drop that sees, 5, 8, maybe 10 power on the extreme end, that's still a really good rate for a 2-drop and still a quite playable card, but just not nearly as busted as it was at base level. And I like this change a lot. What do you think of these balance changes? Do you think some of them are good? Do you think some of them are bad? Do you love them? Do you hate them? Do you think there's cards they should have changed that they didn't? Personally, I feel like the one archetype they've kind of ignored in all of their balance updates is the move deck overall, with Heimdall at the top end, has always felt very lackluster whenever I've tried it. I'd really like to see some redesigns or numbers boost to cards in there. How about you? Let me know in the comments down below what you would like to see changed in Marvel Snap in terms of balance in the future. Thanks for watching, and check back in soon for some more deck highlights with these new cards and changes soon.